girl who presented to us with complaints of hyperandrogenism. And this girl basically was referred to us and diagnosed with complaints of menarche 1 year ago and had periods every 2 months. The FGS, which was found in that regard, the Ferriman-Gallwey score was 6, and ultrasound showed a PCO appearance. Now, any girl who goes to a radiologist with some hairs, some pubertal abnormality will be labeled as PCO. And once you label PCO, they are labeled for life, and this is what happens. And this girl, based upon this ultrasound, was diagnosed as polycystic ovarian disease, which we will show out later is that this is definitely not a case of PCOD. Now, another 14-year-old girl presented with menarche 1 year ago, similar complaints, periods every 2 months, but now this girl is much different. She's having virilization, muscularity, voice change. She's having a clitoromegaly, Ferriman-Gallwey score of 18. Ultrasound again show the PCO appearance, and again she is labeled as the polycystic ovarian syndrome. But definitely, if we see, these two cases are as different as they can be. The first case represents a pubertal hyperandrogenism, which is mainly because of anovulation and insulin resistance. This is basically a very, very sinister pathology. Any girl who has virilization, think of a possibility of an adrenal carcinoma or rarely an ovarian tumor. So therefore, hyperandrogenism is a common problem, which is now coming very often to a pediatrician, to a gynecologist, to an adolescent physician. Most of it is PCOS. 85% is PCOS, while 21-hydroxylase is 5%. Tumors are rare, but what we need to remember is that within this PCOS, there are many, many patients who don't really have PCOS, but they have physiological hyperandrogenism who are labeled as PCOS. So we need to be very cautious in that regard in terms of assessment and management. So we'll go through about different aspects of hyperandrogenism. Just single slide on pathophysiology, and this is one of the most challenging slides. Probably it will take a couple of hours to make, but we'll try to finish off in a minute. So we all know that GnRH is controlling the LH, acting on the theca cells to produce androstenedione, while FSH is activating granulosa cell aromatase to cause estradiol production. Now, theca cells also produce progesterone, and this progesterone inhibits the LH. So this is the basic mechanism of how the hypothalamic, the pituitary, the ovarian axis is working. Now, we also have another organ, as we discussed, the adrenals, which produce another androgen precursors, which is DHEAS. 50% of androgens in an adult female come from the adrenal, 50% come from the ovary. So if you have hyperandrogenism, you either have an ovarian problem or you have an adrenal problem. There could also be a third problem, which is at the level of peripheral conversion. Now, DHEAS and androstenedione, these are precursors. These are not really androgens. So they need to be converted in the adipocyte using the 17-beta-HSD enzyme into testosterone. Now, based upon the selective elevation of a particular androgen, you will know which condition you are dealing with. So if you have an adrenal excess, like a congenital adrenal hyperplasia or an adrenal producing tumor, you will have a very high level of DHEAS beyond 700. If you have an ovarian etiology, your androstenedione will be very, very high. Now, this adipocyte also produces adiponectin, and in the setting of adiponectin deficiency, you will have deposition of fat in different parts, including the liver, which induces insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance is central to the development of hyperandrogenism in PCOS. It causes multiple things. First of all, it causes suppression of IGF-BP, causing increased level of free IGF-1, which causes ovarian growth. It also suppresses the sex hormone binding globulin, allowing more amount of free testosterone, causing more hyperandrogenism. It has a direct effect on the ovary, causing ovarian stimulation. It has a direct effect on the adrenals, causing more production. It has a direct effect on the GnRH, causing more growth. And finally, it also has got an effect on 17-beta-HSD. So if you have insulin resistance, you will have more ovarian production, more adrenal production, as well as more peripheral production. So the fundamental problem in PCOS management is to correct this insulin resistance. If you do not correct it, you are not going to go anywhere. Now, once you develop hyperandrogenism, you will have lots of problems because this is a vicious cycle. This high testosterone will go and act on the ovaries by suppressing the development of the dominant follicle while allowing small follicles to grow, causing a multicystic ovary or a polycystic ovarian appearance. So this PCO morphology is the effect of hyperandrogenism. It is not the cause. It will accentuate its effect, but it's not the fundamental cause. This testosterone will then go and inhibit the inhibitory effect of progesterone on LH. So you will have a high LH state. Therefore, we say, okay, high LH, PCOS. No, high LH is the effect of testosterone. It is not the cause of hyperandrogenism. It will, of course, worsen it. This testosterone will also inhibit the sex hormone binding globulin, causing lesser amount of SHBG, more free testosterone, amplification of the effect. And finally, it has got a direct effect on the adipocyte, causing insulin resistance. So unless you break the cycle of hyperinsulinism as well as testosterone excess, your ovaries are going to have a very bad outcome, and that's going to cause a lot of problem, and that's what we're going to discuss subsequently. Now, of course, androgens has an effect on the pilosebaceous unit, which causes all the clinical manifestations which come to us in that regards. Now, in that regards, what will cause hyperandrogenism? If you have a problem in the ovary, like a polycystic ovarian syndrome, 85% of all cases, a ovarian tumor, very rare in young girls. Hypertrichosis is the severest form of PCOS. I will say large ovaries which produce a lot of testosterone, causing virilization. Insulin resistance of any cause, be it type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or insulin resistance syndrome, will cause hyperandrogenism. Any cause of growth hormone excess, again rare. Then you have adrenal causes, CAH, probably around 8% cases, tumor rare, but again will cause virilization, and Cushing's, and all those are rarer in that perspective. Of course, if you have any cause of anovulation, that will also cause hyperandrogenism. If you have hyperprolactinemia, it can have an effect. And of course, obesity can cause hyperandrogenism because of increased peripheral conversion. But what I'm talking right now is mainly ovarian versus adrenal. This is like 90% of all hyperandrogenism in that perspective. So hyperandrogenism can be classified into physiological, which is basically a normal response of puberty. So in puberty, you have got anovulation, which is very common. If you have anovulation, your progesterone will be low, your LH will be more, you will have small follicles producing androgens. So this is hyperandrogenism. Puberty is associated with insulin resistance. It will cause hyperinsulinism. Puberty is associated with growth hormone excess. Puberty is basically acromegaly, if you think of it. You've got so much high levels of IGF-1, so your ovaries will be more. So there will be a transient form of hyperandrogenism associated with puberty. If it is within the first 2 years of menarche, there is no need of treatment unless there is severe virilization or if there is menorrhagia. So they cannot be and should not be labeled as PCOS. They are labeled at risk PCOS in that regards. Then pathological causes will be ovarian, like PCOS, hypertrichosis, tumor, GHXS, insulin resistance. Adrenal causes like CAH, Cushing's, tumor, and then rarer forms. Any cause of anovulation, be it hyperprolactinemia, hypothalamic, or other things like drugs, particularly valproic acid. So valproic acid can itself cause hyperandrogenism, as can obesity and a portal shunt, wherein you can't sulfate the DHEA. But I would focus mainly on PCOS, CAH, hyperprolactinemia, and maybe Cushing's and adrenal tumor, which are the major causes from a clinical perspective. So a physician who is encountered with a girl presenting with hyperandrogenism, the question is it hyperandrogenism? Is it physiological or pathological? What is the source? What is the cause? And what are the associations? So when we talk about hyperandrogenism, we are largely talking about clinical and biochemical picture. So you need to have hirsutism, acne, if they are severe enough to require retinoic acid, or if there is anovulation, which is the effect of androgens in not forming the dominant follicle. Anovulation, Dr. Yutika has already defined with regards to the various criteria that we use, which is post-menarchal, age-related in that regards. Now, if somebody has got virilization, like clitoromegaly, muscularity, increased voice severity, think of a tumor in that regards. Really, you can have subcutaneous nodules, which like hidradenitis suppurativa, and alopecia is rare in that regards. Now, very important is not to confuse hirsutism with these sort of hairs. These are vellus, soft, depigmented hair. Hypertrichosis is a generalized hair growth, again with a lot of drugs, particularly steroids in India. And hirsutism, of course, is the development of coarse, pigmented, thick hair in androgen-responsive tissues, which include the chin, the chest, the abdomen, the perioralization. And these are rated using the modified Ferriman-Galvez score, which are available in our application, Mediclasses application as well. You have to just match it and you will get the score. We rate 9 different regions of the body, 0 to 4. And then if it's more than 15, that is what you need to worry. Don't bother much about 8 to 15. This is mild. But in adolescents, if you have a score of more than 15, 86% chances of a pathological significant hyperandrogenism is there. Remember, there is a racial disturbance. Internationally, Mediterranean women have more hirsutism. In India, Punjab and Sindh has a more tendency, while Northeast will have a lesser chances of hyperandrogenism. And there is an imperfect correlation. If you have got a FGS more than 15, it is 16% risk in that regard. Now, what about biochemical assessment? What you need to understand is that testosterone is largely bound to SHBG. Only 1% of it is free, but that is the active form. So you have a choice of measuring a total testosterone or a free testosterone. Now, SHBG is affected by estrogen, very importantly. So if somebody is on an estrogen progesterone pill, your total testosterone will be high. It is inhibited by testosterone. So anybody who has got hyperandrogenism will have a low SHBG, and therefore hyperandrogenism accentuates its own effect, and you will have a falsely lower level of testosterone if you measure a total testosterone. So in that regards, total testosterone has lower sensitivity as compared to free testosterone in identifying biochemical hyperandrogenism in that regards. So if we compare that, total testosterone is easy to do. It is got poor sensitivity. It is affected by hyperandrogenism, but it's a good test, easily available. Free testosterone is a difficult test. Many labs just don't do the equilibrium dialysis. They will do the SHBG and give you the result, so it may be not very good. It's got more sensitivity. It is not affected by hyperandrogenism, but it is difficult unless you've got a very good assay available. So if your total testosterone is less than 55, it is considered normal. More than 150 becomes virile. So anybody with more than 150, you have to think of a virilizing tumor in that regards. Free testosterone is not really required usually. So if you now ask about clinical and biochemical picture, look at the Ferriman-Galvez score. If it's mild, less than 8, forget about it. Don't do unnecessary workup. You will get confused in that regards. If it's more than 15, your role of testosterone is only to identify a virilizing condition. So it's already likely. Problem is between 8 to 15. In that setting, you do a morning total testosterone. Now, ideally, testosterone should be done in the morning between day 4 to day 10 or cycles. However, if somebody has come to you and you have done a testosterone and it is high, it's fine. You don't need to unnecessarily repeat that, okay, it was 150, I call her again on the morning. No. If it's low, then you can do a repeat morning sample in that regards. If it's more than 55, you are dealing with hyperandrogenism. Less than 55, it becomes unlikely. Maybe you can do a free testosterone. So my message is, do not unnecessarily rush for all those packages which are there for PCOS, which say, okay, you do all that, you do SHBG, you do free testosterone. Be clinical. Look at the clinical Ferriman-Galvez score in a girl and look for a total testosterone. That is good enough in 99% of cases. Don't waste money unnecessarily in that regard. Now, the next question is, once we have proven this is hyperandrogenism, is it physiological or pathological? This is very important. You don't want to do unnecessary workup. To answer this question, all you need to look at is when did it start. So if it's peripubertal to onset, slowly progressive, mild in severity, more common with obesity, it is physiological. While if it is pre or post-pubertal, if it is lasting more than 2 years, think of a pathological cause. Now, why are we so confused with diagnosing hyperandrogenism in adolescents? Because hirsutism is common. 12% girls will have a FGS which is more than 8 or sometimes even more than 15. Anovulation is physiological. 50% of cycles in the first 2 years are anovulatory. So what do? You have got no clear-cut standards as far as testosterone is concerned, and PCO morphology defined by adult criteria is seen in 30%. What do you do? So when you talk about the diagnosis of PCOS, in adults, we talk about the triad of hyperandrogenism, anovulation, and PCO appearance. In adolescents, the first thing which goes is PCO appearance. The reliability of PCO appearance is not at all in adolescents because you have got larger ovaries, they have got more cysts in there, and you're not able to do a transvaginal scan. So forget about ultrasound. The only role of ultrasound imaging of the pelvis in a girl with hyperandrogenism is to rule out an ovarian tumor or to look at the possibility of a severe endometrial hyperplasia, which may be bad in terms of menorrhagia or in terms of malignancy subsequently. So you have to look at hyperandrogenism and anovulation. Hyperandrogenism, as discussed, is high testosterone, moderate to severe hirsutism, moderate to severe inflammatory acne. For anovulation, use age-specific criteria, so 1 to 2 years. So basically, you have to decide about that. And if we summarize the definition of polycystic ovarian syndrome, I think the best definition is from Rosenfield, who clearly say that PCOS is an unexplained hyperandrogenism of an ovarian origin lasting for more than 2 years. I think there is absolutely no doubt in that. Unexplained ovarian hyperandrogenism for more than 2 years. This is what PCOS is all about. Forget about all those criteria that are there. They're so confusing in that regard. Now you know this is hyperandrogenism. This is a pathology. The next issue is whether it is coming from the adrenals or it is coming from the ovaries. Now for that, there are simple tests. As we said, if you have got high DHEAS, it is likely to be adrenal. Androstenedione can be high in both because adrenal will also produce that. If you use dexamethasone suppression, if it suppresses, it means it's functional adrenal hyperandrogenism. And if response to GnRH is there, it is ovarian. If you want to do one test, DHEAS is the best test in that regard. What about the next issue of cause? So you start with screening, so do a routine screening because any cause of anovulation can cause hyperandrogenism. Look at CBC, liver, kidney, LH, FSH, TSH, and prolactin. If needed, do IGF-1. We never hardly see any GH excess in that regards. Cushing's could be an important differential. CAH should be considered using 17-OHP in that regard. So we'll go one by one. Gonadotropin levels should ideally be done between day 2 to day 5 of periods. Suppose you have somebody who has amenorrhea, you give them progesterone or you can do a withdrawal and then do it, or you can measure it at any time, but preferably day 2 to day 5. If your LH and FSH show that LH is high, FSH is normal, this is more like a polycystic ovarian disease. If your LH and FSH both are high, this may be an evolving ovarian insufficiency, wherein your testosterone is relatively high in that setting. If both levels are low, this is more like a hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. Next step is cortisol, which should be done at 8 a.m. But remember, if some girl is on an estrogen progesterone pill, your cortisol level will be high because the CBG level will be high. If cortisol is less than 138, you have to think of an exogenous steroid, very common in Indian setting because you'll be taking some alternative medications which are causing these problems. If it is between 138 to 276, fine. More than 276, you have to work up for Cushing syndrome in that regards with a urinary free cortisol or a suppression test thereon. Be cautious with OCs, urine free cortisol is appropriate. And remember, gonadotropin levels may be affected if your cortisol levels are high in that regards. What about 17-OHP? If it's more than 1000, it is non-classical CAH. Otherwise, you do a ACTH stimulation test in that regards. Very importantly, 17-OHP should be done at 8 a.m. between day 2 to 10 of periods. If somebody has ovulated, you will have a falsely high 17-OHP. So you can have an amenorrheic girl who suddenly had one ovulation, which may happen. And then your 17-OHP will be falsely elevated. So if you have amenorrhea, in that setting, it is best to combine it with progesterone. So you show that there is no ovulation and yet your 17-OHP is high. So this is very, very important. If you have a secondary amenorrhea beyond 3 months and your progesterone level, 17-OHP is high, please also confirm progesterone because non-classical CAH is rare in that perspective. What about prolactin? Basically, it has to be done in fasting, and you can have some increase with PCOS and estrogen levels. Significance is if it is more than 25 in that regards. DHEAS can be done any time of the day because it is basically not having any diurnal variation. You can do an immunoassay. Levels more than 400 means you will be adrenal cause. More than 700 suggests an adrenal tumor or really a 3-beta HSD deficiency, which is there in that situation. So if we summarize the approach to hyperandrogenism, look at clinical features. If your Ferriman Galway is more than 15, refractory acne or alopecia, evaluate only then. If not, follow up. If it's there, look for virilization. So if a girl has clitoromegaly, muscularity, testosterone more than 150, do an immediate adrenal and ovarian CT scan. If it's not there, look for screening tests which include thyroid, prolactin, and cortisol. If these are normal, look at DHEAS. If it's more than 700, look for an adrenal tumor. If it's normal, exclude CAH. Then exclude the other conditions, you will diagnose PCOD. So the basic thing is that do not do unnecessary workup in mild hyperandrogenism beyond puberty, because even if you label them as PCOS, what are you going to do? You're not going to help it out. Exclude severe virilizing causes. This is very, very important. Look at thyroid, prolactin, these things first. Then go ahead with DHEA. So don't do all the PCOS panel because that is going to cause a lot of confusion in that regard. So we'll now go on to some cases and I'll invite Dr. Riddhi to carry forward the cases. So 15-year-old girl with growth of facial hair.
She had normal menstrual cycle and she had generalized pattern of hair growth. When we objectively assess the Ferriman-Galway score, it was 3.
So what do you think? She has generalized hair growth and the FGS is only 3. Is there something wrong in assessment?
Yeah, it can be hypertrichosis because this is a vellus hair, hypopigmented hair, and fine and soft hair. This is not androgen dependent hair growth. So this is the familial hypertrichosis.
So there's no need of unnecessary workup. So you documented very clear this is actually hyperandrogenism. Second case, 16-year-old girl
with hirsutism, and she had a menstrual irregularity. She had buffalo hump on examination, and keeping in mind of Cushing syndrome as a differential, someone did the overnight dexamethasone suppression test, and it was unsuppressed cortisol level of 150 nanomole per liter after overnight dexamethasone.
So is it Cushing syndrome?
We have to evaluate for the history for that because this is the total cortisol level which is assessed. So based on the unsuppressed level, someone did the ACTH level which was 10. So can be ACTH dependent, considering ACTH dependent Cushing syndrome, MRI was advised. But when we asked the history, she was taking estrogen progesterone pill for menstrual irregularity. So this is the falsely high level of the cortisol, which is done because estrogen increases the CBG level, and this will falsely elevate the cortisol level.
So please do not do cortisol level, the total cortisol within 2 months of OCs. If you want to do a urine-free cortisol.
Which was normal.
Again, a 16-year-old girl with hyperandrogenism.
And she had amenorrhea for 3 months. There was no obesity and galactorrhea, and testosterone level was high.
So is it significant?
Yeah, because there is amenorrhea for 3 months, but there was no obesity. So it is lean PCOS. So considering non-classical CH in the differential, 17 OHP was done, and which was 600. So this is borderline high.
Okay. So what will you do then?
So next step is to do the ACTH stimulation test, and which was normal.
So why do you think was the 17 OHP high in this amenorrheic girl?
So we don't know if she might have ovulated in recent time, and this is post-ovulated 17 OHP level. So we should confirm it with the concurrent progesterone level, and this was high, 220. If it is more than 170, then this 17 OHP is of no value because this can be post-ovulated.
So this is a big message. If somebody has amenorrhea and hyperandrogenism, you want 217 OHP. Do also progesterone to document that there is an ovulation. 17-year-old girl with again similar symptoms.
And she had weight gain and facial swelling. She had mildly elevated blood pressure, stria and myopathy. So she had classical feature of Cushing syndrome. 8 AM cortisol was done, which was low, 89 nanomole per liter. So
what do you think?
So this is the exogenous Cushing syndrome. So before even if the classical feature of Cushing syndrome, we should do the 8M cortisol before doing the overnight exam.
And very importantly, you will not even get a history. They might get it from the medical store. They might be taking some Ayurvedic, some homeopathic, some Unani medication, which may contain steroids. So very important. I think we are seeing much more exogenous rather than the endogenous Cushing's in that regards. 14-year-old girl, again with menarche 1 year ago.
And she had period every 2 months, but she had virilization and muscularity, and her FGS was 18. So even though she was in first menarchal year and she had no significant hyperandrogenism, but the rapidly progressive hyperandrogenism and feature of virilization suggestive of some underlying sinister pathology. It can be adrenal carcinoma. So this is the case.
So very big message. Any girl with virilization, forget about everything. Do abdominal imaging. That's the first thing to do. 16-year-old girl with acne and oligomenorrhea. Yeah, please go ahead.
And her FGS was 18, and she had no clitoromegaly or no voice change suggestive of no virilization feature. Her testo was 35, and LH was high, FSH was normal. And
why is there discrepancy between the two? What do you think can happen?
So this girl had features of hyperandrogenism, but this testosterone was total testosterone. It can be falsely normal in this girl because of hyperandrogenism causes suppression of SHBG, which will cause normal total testosterone level. So best test to do is free testosterone, but she had clinical feature of hyperandrogenism.
If your FGS is more than 15, I would be okay. This is clearly hyperandrogenism. Your testo is not 150, so that's okay. So we can do free testosterone, but it is not essential in that setting. Thank you, Riddhi. So now we've discussed about the overall approach. We'll quickly go through the management. The options, of course, are to use estrogen and progesterone pill, which will cause multiple things, which will basically cause increase in SHBG level. It will cause suppression in LH, and this will be associated with improvement in clinical condition. We have to correct for lifestyle measures and metformin for insulin sensitivity. We can use other agents which can be helpful, like GnRH analog. If somebody has very severe form like hypertrichosis, you shut the whole thing down using GnRH analog. You can use a progesterone only pill, especially if there is more anovulation, and in that setting, if somebody cannot tolerate estrogen in that regards. And you can use a 5-alpha reductase blocker to correct hyperandrogenism like finasteride. You can use anti-androgen like spironolactone. Now, these measures should be done only after 6 months of response, because hair follicle response will take 6 to 12 months in terms of overall response. And of course, you can do epilation, you can do other local measures. And if you're thinking of a functional adrenal hyperandrogenism, somebody who is lean, somebody who is not responding to PCO, to estrogen progesterone pill, then think of a hydrocortisone as a replacement dose. Now, in this regards, the key management thing that we have done, estrogen progesterone, of course, is very useful. It is helpful in menstrual irregularity and hirsutism. Progesterone is only there for menstrual irregularity. Anti-androgens actually worsens menstrual irregularity. They are good mainly for hirsutism. Metformin has got very good effect in insulin sensitization, but other effects are less. So you need to combine the medications, particularly if somebody is obese, somebody who has got insulin resistance, then think of adding metformin will be of help as well. And GnRH analog is, of course, there mainly for a very severe cases in that regards. Now, estrogen progesterone combination, I'll just say one thing. The guidelines do not prefer any particular form of estrogen progesterone combination. All are equally effective. The various preparations include Dine, Yas, which is now not being used because of low estrogen. Your estrogen should be more than 30 at least. This is the minimum which is there. Yasmin is available, Novolon. So any can be used. If you have got more hyperandrogenism, maybe using something with anti-androgen will be helpful. If somebody has got obesity, using a weight neutral like Yasmin may be an option, but any can be used. Once you start estrogen and progesterone, hirsutism should improve in 6 to 12 months. If it is not improving, you give a 90-day cycle. So you give continuous therapy and then have bleeding every 90 days. You add anti-androgens. If menstrual regularity should come in 2 months, if it is not there, if there is an intermenstrual bleeding, think of adherence and need of higher dose. And androgen should be given for 8 to 12 weeks. And if it is not improving, do a free testosterone and consider alternate diagnosis in that regards. Metformin is indicated if there is obesity or acanthosis or metabolic syndrome. dose is 500 going up to 1500 to 2 grams. Effects are improvement in ovulation and testosterone reduction. The effects are usually through weight loss and no effect on hirsutism. And very importantly, if you're giving with estrogen, it will at least reduce the atherogenic effects of the estrogen progesterone pill. So just to summarize the overall management of hyperandrogenism, look at the diagnostic category. If girl is hyperandrogenic, anovulatory beyond 2 years, this is PCOS. If it is not there, you consider it as at-risk PCOS. And if they are there, you think of definite PCOS. Now, in at-risk, if there are emergency features like severe hirsutism and menorrhagia, you may still start treatment, but consider reassessment after 2 to 5 years of age. If they are not there, nothing is required. And if you have mainly anovulation, you can think of progesterone. But if their features are there, then you have to start thinking of treatment. And treatment basically is lifestyle with estrogen progesterone plus minus metformin. So if somebody is having metabolic syndrome, dyslipidemia, impaired fasting glucose, obesity, consider metformin. If there is clinical response, continue till gynecological maturity. That is typically 5 years after menarche. If there is no response, consider antiandrogens. And if there is no response, look at other causes. So the management depends upon the duration of illness. Less than 2 years, generally no treatment, unless they have moderate hirsutism, and then you reassess them. If it's definite, start with estrogen and metformin, and then if you want, you can add antiandrogens subsequently. So we had this 16-year-old girl with hirsutism. Riddhi, you can come quickly. Menarche, 13 and a half years. Every 3 month cycle, FGS is 16.
And acne were severe. And testosterone was 64 milligram per deciliter. Ultrasounds of PCO appearance.
So do you think this girl had a 1.5 year gap between the menarche and the presentation? Is she PCOS?
We should consider treatment because her testo is high, FGS is high, and she had severe acne. But we should label her as at-risk PCOS, and we should revisit the diagnosis in the future.
So here, maybe waiting unnecessarily will cause worsening, because if your androgen is high, you will keep boiling your ovaries. Your ovaries are being basically damaged by that high androgen. So she is at-risk PCOS. You have to consider treatment, but always don't label her as PCOS. Reassess after a couple of years how she is doing in that regard. Second case, 17-year-old
girl with the hirsutism, and she had entered into menarche at 14 years of age. She had oligomenorrhea, and her FGS was 18, and she had acne, and she was obese, BMI of 32. Her testo is high, 72.
So is she PCOS?
Yes, she is PCOS.
She has anovulation, she has biochemical, she has clinical hyperandrogenism beyond 2 years. So this is PCOS if you have excluded other causes. So what do you do from here?
So we should start the treatment with lifestyle measures because she's obese, and with plus or minus metformin and plus oral.
So she is obese, so we have to start with metformin as well. Yes. Now follow up after 6 months. So periods are regular. Weight loss is there, but hirsutism is not improved. So what is there wrong?
So yeah, hirsutism may take time to improve because the life cycle of the hair is around 6 to 12 months. So we should wait for the 6 to 12 months for the recovery of the hirsutism, and we should advise the parents at the onset only.
So don't be too aggressive in adding other agents.
By that time, she can use the cosmetic measures.
6 months later, she's stable. She now has complaints of intermenstrual bleeding. So what do you think is going wrong?
So it can be because of lower estrogen preparation, or she was not taking the drug properly. So we should counsel for that. Because of the lower estrogen, she may get this intermenstrual.
The most common cause of intermenstrual bleeding is poor adherence, because they will miss a couple of tablets here and there, and then they will have bleeding. So ensure that the adherence is good, and of course you may increase it beyond that. 1 year later, she has improvement in everything. Weight has decreased. Periods are regular. They want to stop treatment. What do you advise?
No, we should continue the treatment for at least gynecological maturity of it is 5 years post menarche for the complete recovery and improvement.
That's extremely important in that regards. Now, there's another girl with hirsutism, onset 1 year ago, who has oligomenorrhea, severe menorrhagia. What would you do?
And her testo was also high, and USG showed the PCO appearance. So this is PCOD. And because she had a severe menorrhagia, we should start the high estrogen therapy and followed by estrogen progesterone preparation.
So when you start estrogen, if somebody is having amenorrhea, you do a progesterone withdrawal and start ENP. If somebody is menorrhagia, you may actually give a high dose estrogen, or Dr. Yutika has mentioned about the severe emergency cases management as well. 16-year-old girl with severe hirsutism. What do you think here? FGS is 28.
28. And she had oligomenorrhea. Testo is very high, 110. We should rule out the other pathologies like adrenal and ovarian carcinoma.
So those are ruled out?
Ruled out. And ultrasound PCO appearance. So this is severe PCOD, and because she had severe hyperandrogenism, we can give the continuous estrogen for 3 months, and after that give the withdrawal bleeding.
So this is a big message. If you have somebody who has severe hirsutism, if you give a 21-day cycle, you are missing on 25% of your days. So in this setting, maybe continuous E plus P is required, and then you can be better off. 17-year-old girl with hirsutism immediately after menarche, but now rapidly progressive. What do you think here?
Since last 6 months, so it can be underlying carcinoma may be there. She had amenorrhea and features of virilization like muscularity, voice chain, and testo is very, very high, more than 150. So, and CT showed a large ovary, but no any tumors. So this can be hypertrichosis because
this is a big message. So she was having hyperandrogenism, but now has become worsened. So malignancy becomes less likely, but hypertrichosis becomes important, which happens in the pre-existing PCOS, and then suddenly you have got a large ovarian proliferation, which may happen. She was started on estrogen, progesterone, spironolactone, the most difficult condition to treat. And Dr. Yutika has actually seen cases in which oophorectomy was done just to ensure that all ovary was removed. This is very, very severe. You can give GnRH analog with add back estrogen, which is helpful, but sometimes it's very, very difficult condition to think of. So just to summarize on that, always use strict criteria. FGS less than 15, forget about it in adolescence. Exclude physiological causes, immediate evaluation for virilization, and estrogen, progesterone, and anti-androgens are the cornerstone of therapy. And we like to thank all of you for patient hearing. So this is the app we're discussing, the MediClasses app, which you can access from the iOS and the Android store. And you can go through our adolescent master pediatric course as well, which is available from our learning.growsociety.in. So we'll stop sharing, and I'll now to invite Dr. Kiran for her words in that regards.
Thank you, Dr. Anurag. You have covered, I think, in fact, each and everything. So now no words further are needed to explain anything. Everything has been covered very nicely.
Thank you, ma'am. And Dr. Bansal? I think while Dr. Bansal joins in again, we'll take a couple of questions. Dr. Pankaj is asking from Dubai, is your mobile app free and it works out of India, downloadable? It is available across the world, globally available in the form of the Android and the Apple Store both. For those users who are part of the MediClasses subscription, the master course, it is free for the whole period. Otherwise, we have got certain parts which are completely free, and there are some parts which are on a subscription basis, which is at a nominal charge. You can check it from the various portals. Dr. Vishnu is asking about how to differentiate polycystic ovary from PCOD radiologically. So as Dr. Vishnu has said, there is no role of a polycystic ovarian appearance in, so forget about all that. Forget about what the radiologists are saying. There are definitions, there are criteria which are there. So if your ovarian volume is more than 10, 12 ml, there is no dominant follicle, there are multiple small follicles. That is the criteria, but nobody will now rely on that to diagnose PCOD. Dr. Mudita is asking about DDs of lean PCOS. So when we say lean PCOS, so PCOS is the diagnosis of exclusion. So this lean PCOS, the first thing is what all have we excluded, because exclusion criteria will be huge. We will be more careful in terms of evaluation for things like non-classical PH, particularly in lean PCOS, because theoretically, when you talk about lean PCOS, there are two things. One is that there is increased fat mass, which may be that she is not obese, but still the fat is more. Or the other situation would be that there is actually less fat mass. So more fat mass, if you do a BIA or if you do a DEXA and you see high fat mass, you can then look at it and decide from there. On the other hand, if she is actually lean, I'll be very careful in excluding all other causes before making a diagnosis in that regards.